The prairie dawn burned orange across Willow Gap, a bruised sky stretching over windswept grass still damp from the night's dew. Smoke rose in thin gray threads from a distant point on the southern horizon where yesterday a sod house had stood. Now only charred earth and ash marked the place. Two small figures stumbled through the tall grass barefoot and silent except for the ragged sound of their breathing. Annika, 9 years old, clutched her brother Zachary's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Zachary was 11, his face smudged with soot, his homespun shirt torn at the shoulder to reveal a scraped elbow crusted with dried blood. Annika's cheek bore a shallow cut, the blood dark against her pale skin. Their eyes were wide and unblinking shock holding them upright when exhaustion should have driven them to the ground. Coyotes circled at a distance, lean shadows threading through the grass. Zachary pulled his sister closer, his free hand gripping a broken fence rail he'd picked up somewhere in the dark. His arm trembled with the weight of it. Ahead, a thin column of smoke different from the black pillar behind them rose steady and white. Cooking fire. Zachary steered them toward it, stumbling over prairie dog holes until a ring of hide-covered teepees emerged from the morning haze. Painted designs marked the leather horses, thunderbird symbols the children did not know. A central fire crackled, tended by a woman in a deerskin dress who looked up sharply at their approach and then called out in a language they didn't understand. From the largest teepee, a man stepped through the flap. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin leggings and a fringed shirt decorated with blue and white beadwork. Long black hair hung loose past his shoulders, and his face was angular, copper-toned, unreadable. His eyes were dark and sharp as flint. A knife hung from his belt, and the handle wrapped in rawhide. He was Lakota from the Oglala band Red Hawk, and they would learn about 30 years old. A man who lived between worlds as a hunting guide interpreter and quiet protector of the creek bottoms. Red Hawk's gaze swept over the children. He saw the soot and the torn sleeve, the blood on the girl's face. His hand dropped to the knife hilt, then opened slowly, palm out, a gesture of peace. "You're safe at my fire," he said in careful English, his voice low and steady. "For now." Annika burst into tears. Zachary stood frozen, the fence rail slipping from his grip to land in the dirt with a dull thud. Red Hawk stepped forward, crouched to their level, and gestured toward the teepee. "Come, sit. Warm yourselves." Inside, the children stopped, short eyes adjusting to the dim interior, lit by a sliver of morning light through the smoke hole above. They had expected chaos, perhaps, or strangeness beyond comprehension. Rumors whispered in town painted the Lakota as wild, unpredictable. But what they saw was order. A bow and quiver hung from a lodgepole, the arrows fletched with hawk feathers, each shaft straight and oiled. Blankets lay folded along the wall, neatly mended with careful stitches in colored thread. A small wooden box sat near the fire ring, a medicine kit they would learn traded from a frontier doctor, containing bandages, carbolic salve, and a vial of laudanum. Tins of hardtack were lined up in a precise row. Most surprising of all, a territorial survey map hung from the center pole, hand-drawn creek lines, marked in charcoal intersections, labeled in both English and Lakota symbols. The children stared, the reality clashing with every rumor they'd heard. Red Hawk watched them, then spread a buffalo robe on the floor. "Sit. I'll bring water." They sat trembling as he ducked outside. Annika whispered, "Zach, what do we do?" Zachary swallowed hard. "We stay quiet, and we don't run unless we have to." Red Hawk returned with a clay bowl of water and a strip of cloth. He dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and handed it to Annika. "Clean your face, then we talk." As Annika dabbed at the cut on her cheek, wincing when the cloth touched raw skin, Red Hawk built up the fire with practiced efficiency. The flames grew, casting dancing shadows on the hide walls. He settled across from them, cross-legged, waiting with the patience of a man who understood that some stories needed time to surface. Zachary's hands shook as he held the water bowl. The trembling started in his fingers, spread to his wrists, traveled up his arms until his whole body shuddered with suppressed sobs. Red Hawk reached across and steadied the bowl, his large hands encompassing Zachary's smaller ones, holding them firm until the shaking subsided. "Tell me what you remember," Red Hawk said quietly. "Start with yesterday, before the fire." Zachary's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Pa said we were going to the dam. Him and the other farmers, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Holloway, Mr. Weiss, and 2 others, I didn't know their names. They'd been planning it for weeks, ever since the creek dried up and our garden died." He paused, swallowing hard. Annika leaned against his shoulder, her small hand clutching his sleeve. The memory was fresh, raw, too terrible to speak aloud, but too insistent to keep silent. "Ma told us to stay home, but we followed anyway. Hid in the tall grass near the draw, close enough to see, but far enough they wouldn't spot us. We thought we'd watch them open the dam, watch the water come back, then run home and tell Ma it worked." Red Hawk nodded, not interrupting, his dark eyes steady and present. Zachary continued, his voice breaking. "They made it to the dam just after midnight. The moon was almost full, we could see everything. Pa had a spud bar iron, real heavy. Mr. Schmidt had a pry bar. They started working on the cribbing, pulling at the logs. The water was roaring on the other side. You could hear it even from where we were hiding. Pa was smiling. I saw him smile, like he was winning, like things were finally going to be right again." The boy's face crumpled, tears streaming freely now. Then the riders came. So many of them, maybe 10 or 12. They came from both sides, like they knew exactly where Pa and the others would be, like they'd been waiting. One-eyed Sam was in front. I saw his patch clear in the moonlight. He didn't say nothing, didn't give a warning, just raised his rifle and fired. Annika whimpered, pressing her face into Zachary's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, drawing strength from the contact, and forced himself to continue. Pa fell first, just dropped the spud bar clanging on the rocks. Mr. Schmidt tried to run, but they shot him in the back. Mr. Weiss made it to the water, tried to swim across, but the current pulled him under, and he didn't come up. The others scattered into the brush. I heard more shots, heard men screaming, heard horses crashing through the willows. Then One-Eyed Sam shouted something about no witnesses, and they turned toward our house. Red Hawk's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "What did you do?" "We ran. Ran as fast as we could, but they were on horses. We got home maybe 5 minutes before they did. Ma was on the porch. She saw us coming, saw the riders behind us. She grabbed us, pushed us out the back window, told us to run to the tall grass and hide. Don't come back, no matter what we heard." Zachary's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "We heard her screaming. We heard the fire start. You could hear the thatch catching that crackling sound. We wanted to go back, we tried, but the riders were circling, shooting into the grass around the house. We crawled on our bellies, got maybe 100 yards away, hid in a gully." He looked up at Red Hawk, his young face aged by horror. "One-Eyed Sam threw the torch himself. I saw him do it. He rode right up to the doorway and threw a burning brand through the window. Then he laughed. I heard him laugh." The Tipi fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and Annika's quiet sobbing. Red Hawk reached forward and placed a hand on each child's shoulder, grounding them with his presence. "You are safe now," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "I give you my word, they will not touch you while I draw breath." Zachary looked into Red Hawk's eyes and saw something there that settled the terror churning in his chest, not false comfort, but genuine protection offered by someone who understood violence and knew how to meet it. "What do we do now?" Zachary asked. "Now," Red Hawk said, standing and moving to the Tipi entrance, "we find allies. And we make sure your father's courage wasn't wasted." Red Hawk lived between worlds. Born in the Oglala Tipi circles farther north, he had survived the wars with the U.S. War Department, the sweeps that scattered his people. A thigh scar marked him a saber cut from a skirmish near the Black Hills when he was younger, a cavalry raid that had killed his wife and infant daughter 7 years past. The memory was a closed wound, now scarred over, but never fully healed. He walked without a limp most days, but in cold weather or after long rides, the leg stiffened, forcing him to favor it, a physical reminder of what had been taken and what he'd survived. Now he worked as a hunting guide, an interpreter for trader settlers, and the occasional surveyor living in the willow bottoms near Copper Creek, where the land was still unclaimed enough for a Lakota man to pitch his teepee without immediate trouble. He'd watched the creek for months, noting the dropping water levels, the dry stream beds where minnows once flashed, the way the cottonwood's leaves yellowed early from stress. He knew the cause. Upstream, Reginald Blackthorn, known in the valley as Flint Face for his cold, unyielding demeanor, had built a crib dam across Copper Creek. The dam diverted water to his stamp mill at the coal dust mine, a sprawling operation that crushed ore day and night, the thunder of the machinery audible for miles. Blackthorn owned the mine, the mill, and a sprawling cattle ranch that stretched across the northern ridges. He wore a black suit, even in the heat, his face lined and hard, his eyes pale as winter ice. He was a man who measured worth in tonnage and profit margins, and he had no patience for small homesteaders clinging to quarter sections of marginal land. The dam was the key to his larger plan. By diverting the creek, he dried out the small farms downstream, forcing families to sell cheap or abandon their claims altogether. Blackthorn intended to buy the land for a rail spur extension track that would connect his mine directly to the territorial markets, multiplying his profits tenfold. The plan was methodical, ruthless, and legal enough to avoid immediate challenge. His foreman was a man called One-Eyed Sam, tall, lean, with a stitched leather eye patch covering his left socket, the eye lost in a knife fight in a Denver gambling hall. Years before, Sam led a crew of riders who patrolled Blackthorn's fences and beyond, enforcing the new order with rifle butts, torches, and threats. They burned out squatters, intimidated witnesses, and made sure no one questioned the dam. Red Hawk had seen the smoke from Annika and Zachary's homestead the night before. He'd ridden close enough to see the flames, the collapsed roof, the scattered belongings. He'd also seen riders circling silhouettes against the fire. One-Eyed Sam's distinctive profile, among them the eye patch, visible even at a distance, backlit by flames. He'd waited until they left, then searched for survivors at first light, tracking small footprints through the dew-wet grass, until he found the children stumbling toward his camp at dawn. Now, as the sun climbed higher and the children slept fitfully on buffalo robes inside the teepee, Red Hawk bundled them onto his paint mare and rode east toward Mud Creek, a small settlement clustered around a general store, a livery, and a one-room schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was a simple frame structure with a tin roof, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and rows of benches worn smooth by years of use. A locked cabinet held primers and slates, and a small bell hung by the door. The schoolteacher was Mabel Carter. She was about 28, slender and pale-skinned, with light brown hair pinned back in a practical bun. She wore a gray wool dress, the hem dusty from the walk to school each morning, and a white apron smudged with chalk. Her hands were small but calloused from chopping kindling and hauling water. She had immigrated from Pennsylvania 3 years earlier, seeking work and a life away from crowded cities where disease had taken everyone she loved. She'd lost her own family to typhoid back east, a younger sister named Ruth, barely 16, her parents within days of each other, and the grief had driven her west, seeking purpose in teaching children who had so little. When Red Hawk rode up with the children, Mabel was sweeping the schoolhouse steps, preparing for the day's lessons. She looked up, saw the soot and blood on the children's clothes, the hollow look in their eyes, and dropped the broom with a clatter. "What happened?" she asked, rushing forward. Red Hawk dismounted carefully, his thigh protesting the long ride. "Their homestead burned. Parents didn't make it. I found them at dawn." Mabel's face went pale, her hand rising to her mouth. She knelt, examining Annika's cheek and Zachary's torn sleeve with gentle fingers. "Come inside. I'll get water and bandages." Inside, the children sat on a bench, while Mabel ladled stew from a pot on the stove, venison and root vegetables, simple but nourishing. Her hands shook slightly as she served them, the ladle rattling against the tin bowl. As Zachary reached for the bowl, Mabel's eye caught on something, a brass suspender button on his cuff, half hidden under the torn fabric. She leaned closer, squinting at the markings stamped into the metal. The button was stamped with a brand, a stylized steer head, above the letters BCM Blackthorn Cattle and Mining. Mabel's breath hitched. She glanced at Red Hawk, who had noticed it too, his expression darkening. Their eyes met, a silent question passing between them. "Where did you get this button?" Mabel asked gently, touching Zachary's sleeve. Zachary looked down, confused. "I don't know. Maybe it fell off someone's gear. My pa found it in the dirt last week near the creek. He put it in his pocket, then I guess it ended up on me somehow." Mabel straightened, her jaw tightening. She motioned for Red Hawk to step outside. On the porch, she spoke quietly, urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's Blackthorn's mark. If those children are connected to him, or if he thinks they saw something they shouldn't have, he won't let them wander free." Red Hawk nodded grimly. "The fire wasn't an accident. I saw riders. One-eyed Sam was there leading them." Mabel wrapped her arms around herself, thinking quickly, despite the fear clawing at her chest. If the sheriff takes them, they'll be placed out on distant farms through the welfare system. They call it orphan placement. The children travel by wagon to families who need labor. Sometimes it's honest work, a genuine home. Often it's not. They could end up worked like mules, separated, beaten, or worse. I've seen it happen. Red Hawk's expression darkened, his hand resting on the knife hilt at his belt. "Or they stay here and the men who burned their home come hunting." Mabel looked at him, her gray eyes steady despite the fear. "Then we make a plan. We keep them safe until we figure out what Blackthorn wants and how to stop him." Red Hawk studied her, this small, determined woman who taught children to read and kept order in a rough settlement with nothing but a bell and her voice. He saw strength there, the kind forged in grief and hardened by necessity. He nodded slowly. "Agreed. But if this goes bad, we need allies. People we can trust." Mabel thought for a moment, mentally cataloging the settlement's residents, weighing who could be trusted and who might be in Blackthorn's pocket. Dr. Solomon Pike. He's about 40, came from Germany years ago. He treats everyone settlers, Lakota miners. He doesn't ask questions and he doesn't take sides unless he has to. He's principled. He'll help. Who else? Clara Weiss. Widow, farms a quarter section at Rock Creek with her son Henrik. She's strong, smart, keeps a Spencer carbine under her flour sacks and knows how to use it. She trades eggs for chalk here every week. She's lost water from the dam, too. Her fields are dying. She'll want in. Red Hawk approved, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. Good. We'll need more than words to keep these children alive. Inside, the children ate in silence, exhaustion finally overtaking them. The hot food and warmth of the stove worked like medicine, their eyelids drooping despite their fear. Mabel spread blankets on the floor near the stove, and they collapsed into sleep almost immediately. Annika curled against Zachary their breathing evening, out into the deep rhythms of childhood exhaustion. Red Hawk sat on the porch steps, watching the road with the stillness of a predator, his hand resting on the knife hilt. Mabel joined him after a few minutes, sitting a respectful distance away. Her hands folded in her lap, smoothing the fabric of her apron repeatedly, a nervous habit she couldn't quite suppress. "You're Tipi," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "It's not what I expected." Red Hawk glanced at her, one eyebrow raising slightly. "You expected chaos." "I don't know what I expected. Maybe I believe the rumors. People in town say—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "Most do," he said without rancor. "They see what they want to see. It's easier than seeing what's real." He paused, then added, "I learned order from my grandmother. She said a warrior who can't keep his camp can't keep his people. So I keep it. It's a small thing, but it matters." Mabel nodded, studying his profile in the morning light. "Your leg. You favor it sometimes." "Old wound. Saber cut years back during a raid." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press, recognizing the weight of unspoken history in his silence. "If it opens, or if you need it checked, I can help," she offered. "I've stitched wounds before farm accidents mostly, but I know how to keep a wound clean and how to tie sutures that hold. I'm no doctor, but I'm careful and my hands are steady." Red Hawk met her eyes, surprised by the offer. In his experience, white settlers rarely offered help without suspicion or expectation, without some angle or calculation. But her gaze was direct, honest, holding nothing back. "I'll remember that," he said finally. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, the heat pressing down on the valley like a physical weight. A breeze stirred the dust in the road, carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. In the distance, the faint thud of Blackthorn's stamp mill echoed across the valley like a heartbeat, relentless and cold. Thud, 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 a mechanical pulse that never stopped day or night. At dusk, on the first full day with the children fed and rested enough to speak coherently, Mabel sat them down on the school bench. Red Hawk leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded, listening intently, his posture relaxed but alert. "Tell us what happened," Mabel said softly, her voice carrying the gentle firmness of someone used to coaxing truth from frightened children. "All of it. We need to know everything if we're going to help you." Annika looked at Zachary, seeking permission or courage or both. He swallowed hard, his throat working, then began to speak, his voice steadier now than it had been in the teepee. "Our pa had a small claim on a draw off Copper Creek. Just a few acres, but it was ours. We had water rights. Pa showed us the paper from the county clerk. It had our name and a stamp, all official looking, with a seal and everything. He kept it in a tin box under the floorboards. But then Mr. Blackthorn built the dam upstream. The creek dried up within a week. Our garden died. The vegetable plants all withered, turned brown and crispy. Our well went brackish. You could taste the alkali, and it made you sick if you drank too much. Pa tried to talk to Blackthorn, rode all the way to his office at the mine. But Blackthorn said the water was his now for the mill, and if we didn't like it, we could leave. Said it legal-like with fancy words, but it meant the same thing." Zachary's voice shook as the memory sharpened. "Pa and some other farmers, Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Holloway and Mr. Weiss and a couple others, decided to break the dam. Not destroy it completely, just open a gap so water could flow again, share it fair. They went at night with tools. Pa had a spud bar iron, real heavy, must have weighed 20 pounds. They made it to the dam, started prying at the cribbing. Then riders came. Lots of them, more than a dozen." Annika spoke up, her voice barely a whisper, her small hands twisting the fabric of her dress. "Ma told us to run and hide. We hid in the tall grass way out past the fence line, maybe 200 yards from the house. We heard shouting from the dam voices, yelling then gunshots. So many gunshots it sounded like the 4th of July firecrackers, only louder and scarier. Then the riders came to our house. We saw them do it. One man, he had a patch over his eye, sitting his horse like he owned the world. He threw the torch himself right through the front window. Zachary continued, tears streaming now, his voice breaking apart. We waited until they left, until the horses rode away, and we couldn't hear them anymore. When we went back to the house, Ma and Pa were inside. The door was blocked by a fallen beam. We tried to pull them out, both of us pulling as hard as we could, but the roof was collapsing and the heat was so strong it burned our faces. We tried so hard, but we couldn't get to them. His voice dissolved into sobs. Mabel pulled both children into a hug, holding them tightly as they wept, her own eyes wet. Red Hawk's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening. He'd seen too much death in his life, too much cruelty inflicted by men who valued power over humanity. But the targeting of families of children still ignited a cold fury in him that took effort to control. After a long moment when the sobs subsided into hiccups and shaky breathing, Annika pulled back from Mabel's embrace. She fumbled with the hem of her dress, fingers shaking, and produced a small brass locket tarnished and warm from being pressed against her skin. She opened it carefully, revealing a folded slip of paper inside, thin and yellowed with age and handling. She handed it to Mabel with both hands, as if passing something precious and fragile. Mabel unfolded it, carefully smoothing the creases. It was a survey slip hand-drawn on official county paper, with their father's name, Jacob Mueller, written in careful script at the top. Below was a rough map showing the draw, the creek, and boundary markers. A county clerk's stamp showed a water allotment on the draw, dated 3 years prior, with a signature and official seal pressed into wax at the bottom. The ink was faded, but legible, the signature official and binding. Red Hawk leaned over Mabel's shoulder to examine it by the lamplight, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the leather and sage smoke in his clothing. This is real. This proves your family had legal rights to the water. Priority rights, even dated before Blackthorn's dam application would have been filed. Zachary nodded emphatically. Pa said Blackthorn was stealing it. He said if we could show the paper to a judge, maybe we'd get the water back, maybe we could save the farm. But the judge is in Thunder Mesa, 2 days' ride, and Pa didn't think he'd live long enough to make it if Blackthorn found out he had proof. To ground the court's ruling in the period's practice, the clerk entered into the record a letter from the Lakota Tribal Council confirming the children's placement as customary guardianship. 2 sworn affidavits from townspeople, one a midwife, the other a schoolmaster, attested to the children's health schooling and regular provision of food and shelter under Lakota care. The judge cited a prior territorial decision recognizing community-acknowledged guardianship, where statute was silent, noting the best interests of the minors and the absence of any lawful claimant better suited to their welfare. Mabel looked at Red Hawk, her gray eyes wide with realization. If this is real, and it clearly is, Blackthorn had no legal right to cut them off. He's been forcing people out illegally, using the dam as a weapon. Red Hawk's expression was grim, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. And now he's covering his tracks. These children are witnesses to murder. If they talk, if this paper reaches a judge, Blackthorn's entire plan falls apart. The land sails the rail spur, all of it collapses. Annika's voice was small, tentative. There's something else. She reached into her other pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out another folded paper. This one torn at the edges, scorched brown, in places smelling faintly of smoke. Zachary explained, his voice steadier now. Pa took this from Blackthorn's office the night they went to the dam. He snuck in through a back window while the others worked on the cribbing. He said it was proof of what Blackthorn was really doing, proof that would hold up in any court. He told us to hide it if anything happened to him, told us it was more important than anything. Mabel unfolded the torn page with shaking hands, careful not to tear it further along the charred edges. It was part of a ledger columns of numbers and names written in tight controlled script. The header read, Water Assessments, Copper Creek District. Below, a list of homesteaders' names ran down the left column, each with a dollar amount beside it in the right column. The sums were large, $20, $35, $50, far larger than any legitimate water assessment or county tax. At the bottom, a note in the same tight script, paid to SK for removals. No witnesses. Proceed as discussed. Mabel's hand trembled, the paper rustling. This is extortion. He's been charging farmers for water access, water they legally own, then using the money to pay someone this SK to remove anyone who doesn't pay or who causes trouble. Red Hawk's voice was ice. His words clipped and precise. One-Eyed Sam, Samuel Keller. That's his full name. I've heard it at the trading post when he buys supplies. He brags about his work sometimes when he's drinking, talks about problem-solving for Blackthorn. Zachary nodded, his young face pale and set. I saw him at the fire. I saw his eye patch clear as day when he rode up. He was the one who lit the torch and threw it on our roof. I'll never forget his face. Never. The room fell silent, except for the crackle of the stove and the soft whistle of wind through the broken window frame. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying the smell of rain on distant air. Then, with a sharp crack that made everyone jump, a rock smashed through the window, scattering glass shards across the floor in a glittering spray. A folded note was tied to it with rough twine. Red Hawk moved fast, pure instinct, pulling Mabel and the children away from the window and behind the desks. He picked up the rock, examining it briefly, riverstone heavy, deliberately chosen, then untied the note with quick fingers and read it aloud. His voice flat and controlled. Turn out the strays. Creek's ours. Last warning. Before anyone could react, before Red Hawk could move toward the door, a second object flew through the broken window, a kerosene-soaked rag wrapped around a stone lit and sputtering with orange flame. It landed on the wooden floor near the primer cabinet, and flames licked up instantly, racing along the dry floorboards with hungry speed, the kerosene accelerating the spread. Red Hawk lunged forward without hesitation, grabbed the burning rag with his bare hands, ignoring the searing pain, and hurled it back out the window into the dirt yard. His palms blistered instantly, the skin red and peeling. But he ignored the pain, spinning to stamp out the spreading flames on the floorboards with his boots. Mabel seized the schoolhouse bell rope and rang it hard. Yanking the rope with all her strength, the sound clanging out across the settlement like an alarm bell, sharp and urgent and impossible to ignore. Within minutes, neighbors arrived, farmers in work clothes, storekeepers in aprons, the blacksmith still carrying his hammer, all carrying buckets and wet sacks. They beat the flames down methodically, dousing the floor with bucket after bucket of water from the creek until only smoke and charred wood remained, the acrid smell thick in the air. The fire was out, but the message was painfully clear. In the chaos of stamping and dousing, Red Hawk and Mabel locked eyes across the smoky room. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, palms held awkwardly away from his body, the skin already blistering and weeping. She pressed a damp kerchief into his hands, without a word, wrapping it around the burns with quick, efficient movements. Hold this, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear and barely suppressed fury. He did, and she wrapped her hand over his to secure the cloth, her touch firm and steadying. For a moment, neither moved. She felt the heat radiating from his burned skin through the damp fabric, smelled the smoke in his hair, mixed with leather and Sage saw the tight line of his jaw as he controlled the pain through sheer will. He felt her hand small strong, careful, and something shifted in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Then the moment broke as a neighbor called out about checking for more fires. Red Hawk stepped back, nodding, once his face unreadable. They know the children are here. We're out of time. Mabel's jaw set, her gray eyes hardening with resolve. Then we move fast. No more waiting. Over the next 3 days, the group moved with desperate urgency. The stakes crystallized with terrible clarity. Present the evidence to Judge Kingsley in Thunder Mesa before Blackthorn silence them permanently or lose everything: the children, the land, their lives, any hope of justice for the murdered farmers. Clara Weiss arrived at dawn on the second day, a sturdy woman in her mid-30s with sun-weathered skin and the color of tanned leather, iron-gray eyes that missed nothing, and hands scarred from years of hard labor, rope burns, knife cuts, the thick calluses of someone who'd worked every day of her adult life. She wore a practical calico dress and a wide-brimmed hat, with a stampede string, a Spencer carbine slung over her shoulder in a worn leather scabbard, and the brass fittings polished bright. She'd lost her husband Klaus to fever 2 years prior, typhoid that swept through the valley one terrible summer, and ran her farm alone with her teenage son Henrik, a quiet boy of 16 with his father's steady demeanor and his mother's sharp eyes. The dam had dried her fields within weeks of its construction, killed her carefully tended vegetable garden that had fed them through winters, and left her cattle thin and desperate, ribs showing through their hides. She had no patience left for Blackthorn's games, and no illusions about what men like him were capable of when threatened. "Show me what you need," Clara said without preamble, setting the carbine on Mabel's desk, with a solid thunk that spoke of weight and purpose. Together, they fortified the schoolhouse with grim efficiency. They drilled the older pupils, 10 children between ages 8 and 15, in a grim routine that felt surreal in a schoolhouse meant for reading primers and practicing arithmetic. Load, pass ammunition, take cover. Annika, despite her fear, shuttled cartridges from a wooden crate to the firing positions, her small hands careful with the brass rounds, treating each one with a respect, do something that could save or take a life. Clara set up a defensive barricade behind the desks, stacking them too high in a horseshoe pattern, reinforcing them with grain sacks filled with dirt, 50-pound sacks that took 2 people to lift into place. She positioned herself at the main window carbine at the ready, teaching the older boys how to reload quickly without fumbling in panic, how to keep their heads down below the window line, how to breathe through fear instead of letting it paralyze them. Red Hawk taught Mabel silent hand signals, elk stalking signs used by Lakota hunters for generations, a language of survival older than the territory itself. Point, with 2 fingers for direction. Closed fist held high for stop immediately. Open palm facing out for danger approaching. 2 fingers to the eyes for watch that position. She mimicked each one with intense focus, her gray eyes locked on his, absorbing every detail with the concentration of someone who knew lives would depend on getting it right. 2 days later, Red Hawk and Zachary rode bareback on Red Hawk's paint mare to retrieve the family trunk from the ruins of the Muller homestead. Mabel had insisted they bring back any remaining belongings, something tangible for the children to hold onto some thread of continuity in their shattered lives. They reached the site at midday, the sun high and merciless. The sod house was a blackened shell. The roof collapsed inward, charred beams jutting like broken ribs from a carcass. Ash drifted in the breeze, settling on their shoulders like gray snow. They found the trunk half buried in dirt near the collapsed barn, its leather straps scorched black, the wood warped by water and heat. Together, they dragged it clear mud, sucking at their boots. As Red Hawk pried the lid open with his knife, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the ridge above, distant but approaching fast. 2 riders appeared on the ridgeline, silhouetted against the sky. Henry rifles glinting in the sun and their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats pulled low. Move, Red Hawk hissed. He grabbed Zachary by the collar, hauled him onto the mare in one smooth motion, and spurred her toward a shallow cut bank. Shots cracked behind them, bullets kicking up dirt, whining past close enough to feel the air displacement. The mare lunged into a dry creek bed, and Red Hawk dropped behind the cut bank, pulling Zachary down beside him, covering the boy's body with his own. He pulled his Winchester .44-40 from the saddle scabbard and showed Zachary how to chamber a round. Don't fire unless you must. If you do, aim low for the body, breathe steady, squeeze the trigger slow. The riders circled above, shouting to each other. One fired into the creek bed, the bullet whining off a rock. Red Hawk counted to 5, then returned fire. One rider's horse reared. He cursed and pulled back behind a boulder. They dashed for a copse of cottonwoods 50 yards ahead. Another shot closer this time. A branch above Zachary's head splintered, raining bark and leaves. They reached the trees, splashing through a shallow ford. They circled back using a narrow deer trail hidden by thick brush. By the time the riders reached the ford, Red Hawk and Zachary were behind them, moving fast and silent. They retrieved the trunk, Red Hawk lashing it to the mare's back, and disappeared into the cottonwoods before the riders realized they'd been outflanked. As they emerged onto open prairie, a thunderhead loomed on the horizon, black and towering, rising thousands of feet into the sky. Lightning flickered in its belly. The wind shifted suddenly, cold and sharp. Within minutes, rain lashed down in sheets, turning the ground to slick mud. Then lightning struck the grass a quarter-mile north. Flames erupted despite the rain, fed by dry undergrowth beneath the wet surface layer, spreading fast with terrifying speed. Red Hawk pushed the mare harder, but the trunk slowed them. Smoke stung their eyes. The mare whinnied in panic. Red Hawk beat at flames, licking up around the mare's legs with his blanket, the wool smoldering in his hands, heat blistering his already burned palms. Zachary clung to the trunk, coughing violently. Red Hawk pulled his bandana up over the boy's nose and mouth, then his own. They broke through the fire line, just as the rain intensified to a downpour, dousing the flames behind them in a hissing cloud of steam and smoke. The mare stumbled, exhausted. Red Hawk's lungs burned with each breath. Zachary's hands were blistered from gripping the hot trunk straps. They reached the schoolhouse at dusk, soaked through and gasping. Mabel ran out, her face transforming to relief when she saw them alive. Fire. Riders. Ambush. Red Hawk slid off the mare, nearly collapsing. Mabel helped him inside, sat him by the stove, and peeled back his shirt. Smoke inhalation had scorched his throat. Every breath rattled wetly. Mabel boiled water-made compresses soaked in cool tea and wrapped Zachary's hands in clean linen strips. The trunk. Red Hawk rasped. Open it. Mabel and Clara pried the trunk open. Inside, beneath charred clothes and a singed quilt, they found another folded paper, the torn ledger page Jacob Mueller had stolen from Blackthorn's office. Mabel spread it on the table. Names ran down one column: Jacob Mueller, Hans Schmidt, Carl Holloway, Henrik Weiss, and others. Dates filled another column, payment amounts in a third, and at the bottom, scrawled in Blackthorn's own tight, controlled hand, SK removals authorized. No witnesses. Proceed with maximum efficiency. Mabel looked at Red Hawk, her face pale. This is proof. Direct proof. Murder for hire written in his own hand. Red Hawk nodded and then coughed hard, doubling over. Mabel knelt beside him, steadying him with a hand on his back. You need rest now, or you won't be able to travel when the time comes. 4 days after the inciting incident, Mabel and Dr. Solomon Pike made the dangerous trip to Blackthorn's company town, a sprawling settlement built entirely around the mine, with a telegraph office, assay office, company store, and workers' barracks. Dr. Solomon Pike was a compact man in his early 40s, balding with a high forehead, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken and badly set years ago. He'd emigrated from Germany in the late 1860s, escaping political troubles. He treated everyone without bias, settlers, Lakota miners, and kept his opinions to himself unless pressed. But he had a moral core that, once engaged, was immovable as granite. They rode west under a pale sky streaked with high cirrus clouds. The road passed Blackthorn's property line, marked by a barbed wire gate and a crude wooden sign. Trespassers shot. No exceptions. BCM. The town itself was oppressive. The stamp mill dominated everything, a massive wooden structure 3 stories tall. On the machinery inside, pounding day and night with rhythmic thunder. Thud, 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 mechanical and relentless. At the telegraph office, a clerk named Pocket Paul worked the key. He was short and nervous, maybe 30 years old, with ink-stained fingers and a thin mustache that twitched when he was anxious, which was often. Mabel had hidden the survey slip and a copy of the ledger page inside a school primer. She composed a coded message to Judge Kingsley: request urgent review. Water rights dispute Copper Creek. Evidence held witness protection required. MC. She signed a fake name, Mary Carson, and paid cash. Pocket Paul tapped out the message with quick, nervous movements. But his eyes lingered on Mabel's face too long on Pike's medical bag, noting details. Then the door opened. One-eyed Sam stepped inside his stitched leather eye patch, catching the lamplight. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Afternoon, school marm?" "Afternoon." Sam leaned against the counter too close. His breath smelled of whiskey and tobacco. "Funny seeing you all the way out here. School business." "Supply order?" She lied smoothly. "Books from Denver." He studied her a moment longer, then back to Mabel. "You be careful, ma'am. A lot of accidents happening lately around these parts. Desperate people do stupid things." "I'll keep that in mind." He left his boots heavy on the wooden steps outside, spurs jingling. Mabel and Pike waited until his horse disappeared down the road. Then they hurried back to the wagon. "He knows something," Pike said quietly as they drove out of town. "Maybe. But we got the message out." Mabel looked back at the telegraph office, where Pocket Paul watched from the window, his face pale and worried. 5 days after the inciting incident, Red Hawk and Zachary crept along Copper Creek at night, scouting the dam under a moon that was barely a thin crescent. The structure loomed in the darkness, cribbing of logs and stones, a floodgate controlled by a heavy chain and winch mechanism. Water roared through the sluice toward the stamp mill. 6 guards patrolled the site in rotating shifts. Red Hawk counted them, memorizing positions, shift changes, blind spots. Near the floodgate, 2 powder kegs sat stacked on a wooden pallet, blasting supplies poorly secured. A dropped ledger key, small brass ornate with decorative scrollwork, lay half buried in mud under a support beam near the winch. Red Hawk spotted it and pocketed it silently. A guard's boot scuffed gravel nearby. Red Hawk grabbed Zachary and rolled them both into a thicket of reeds, the water cold and shocking, covering the boy with his own body. They lay motionless, pressed into the mud. The guard paused 10 feet away, scanning the darkness with his lantern raised high. He stood there for 30 seconds, then spat tobacco juice into the creek and moved on. Red Hawk kept his hand gentle over Zachary's mouth, signaling silence. Zachary nodded understanding and forced himself to breathe slower. They waited until the guard's lantern disappeared around the bend. Then they slipped back into the shadows, moving like smoke. Throughout these days, the unspoken bond between Red Hawk and Mabel deepened. They worked side by side, planning routes, dividing supplies, teaching the children. Their hands brushed passing maps, fingers lingering. Eye contact stretched during planning sessions, holding longer than necessary. One evening, as they stacked the last grain sacks, Red Hawk spoke quietly. "When I was young, My grandmother told me that a warrior's strength isn't in his weapons. It's in knowing what's worth protecting. He glanced at Mabel, then away quickly. I used to think she meant land or people in general. Now I'm not sure. Mabel paused. What do you think she meant? I think she meant that once you choose what matters really matters, you don't let go, no matter what it costs. Mabel set the sack down, turning to face him fully. I lost my family back east. Typhoid took them all, my mother, then Ruth, my little sister who was 16, then my father. I came west because I couldn't stay in a place full of ghosts. She looked at him directly. But I'm tired of losing people. I'm tired of standing by while cruel men take what they want. These children, I won't let Blackthorn erase them the way Typhoid erased my family. I won't. Red Hawk met her eyes. Something unspoken settled between them, a shared wound, a shared resolve. Neither will I, he said simply. Neither spoke of it again directly, but it was there between them from that moment forward. On the morning of the 5th day, a reply telegram arrived. Mabel tore open the envelope, read the message, and went pale. What is it? Red Hawk asked. Mabel's voice shook. Blackthorn has filed a petition to become the children's legal guardian. The room went silent. He's claiming he's a distant relative and benefactor. He's submitted documents, forged documents, showing he holds a lien on the Mueller homestead due to unpaid debts. If the court accepts it, he'll take the children, place them out as laborers in his mining camps, and seize the homestead for his rail spur. Red Hawk's jaw clenched. When is the hearing? 7 days from now. Rock Creek Courthouse. Kingsley says we can challenge it, but we need to present the evidence in person with the children present. And we need to keep the children alive until then. Dr. Pike removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. Blackthorn is betting we won't make it to the hearing. He's covering all angles, legal, physical, procedural. Clara spoke quietly from her position at the window. He's going to come for them, hard and fast, probably tonight or tomorrow. Red Hawk nodded grimly. We have 2 choices. Fortify here and hold until Kingsley arrives, or run north to Purple Sage and keep moving. Mabel looked at him, her voice steady. If we run, he wins. He'll claim we kidnapped them. We make our stand here. Red Hawk studied her face. It will be dangerous. Then we'd better be ready. That night, Red Hawk spoke quietly to Mabel. If it turns bad, if they breach the schoolhouse, I take the children north. You and Clara hold them, then follow. Mabel turned to face him close in the darkness. If it turns bad, we both take the children. We don't leave the other behind. Not you, not me, not any of us. Red Hawk held her gaze. You could die. So could you. So could all of us. But we do this together or not at all. Red Hawk studied her for a long moment. He nodded slowly. Together then. On the 6th day, betrayal struck. Dr. Pike was making his morning rounds when One-Eyed Sam and 3 riders ambushed him. They dragged him from his wagon, bound his hands, and hauled him to Blackthorn's office. Blackthorn sat behind the desk. Fingers steepled his pale eyes, cold. Dr. Pike, you've been busy lately. Pike said nothing. You've been seen with the school teacher and the Lakota guide. I know you're helping them hide those Mueller children. I know they have documents that were stolen from me. Blackthorn's voice was calm, reasonable. Return the ledger page. Sign a statement declaring the children vagrant orphans. In return, I'll fund a new clinic, modern supplies, $50 a month. No. Blackthorn's smile vanished. He nodded once to Sam, who left. Minutes later, Sam returned roughly, dragging Henrik Weiss, whose face was bruised, lips split, and bleeding hands tied behind his back. "Henrik hasn't done anything," Pike said sharply. "Not yet," Blackthorn replied with terrifying calm. "But if you don't cooperate, I'll hang him for horse theft before sunset. One of my men will swear he saw the boy steal a horse. I'll have a warrant signed within the hour. The boy will hang, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." Pike looked at Henrik terrified, barely 16, trembling but trying so hard to be brave, and something broke inside. His principles crumbled against the immediate reality of an innocent boy's life. "What do you want me to sign?" Blackthorn slid a paper across the desk. Pike read it with growing horror, a statement declaring the children had no legal guardian, no verifiable documents, no legitimate right to remain without proper placement. His hand shook as he signed it, hating himself. But even as he signed with his right hand, his left hand moved with careful stealth. He palmed the small brass ledger key from his boot and slipped it into his coat pocket, hidden in the inner lining, unseen. Blackthorn released Henrik with a contemptuous shove. Pike helped him up, both leaving as quickly as dignity allowed. Later that afternoon at the schoolhouse, Pike confessed everything in a voice thick with shame. Mabel's face went hard. "You gave him what he wanted." "I gave him a statement signed under duress with a witness present. It's not legally binding." Pike pulled the ledger key from his pocket, setting it on the table. "And I kept this. He doesn't know we have it. I also wrote an affidavit last night, detailed everything. It's in my saddlebag, signed, dated, notarized. If I fail again, you have that." Red Hawk studied him, seeing the genuine anguish. "You risked your life keeping that key. I failed once. I won't fail again." Pike's voice broke. "I won't." Mabel softened slightly. "Then help us finish this. That's how you make this right." Pike nodded, wiping his eyes. Meanwhile, that same afternoon, One-Eyed Sam ambushed Red Hawk at the ford. The attack was sudden, Sam lunging from the willows with a Bowie knife, no warning. Red Hawk twisted purely on instinct, parrying with his own knife, steel ringing against steel. They grappled in shallow water mud, churning beneath their boots. Sam slashed wildly. Red Hawk blocked, but the tip scored his ribs a shallow cut, burning hot blood welling immediately. Red Hawk pivoted, drove Sam back against a willow trunk, then impaled the man's forearm on a broken branch jutting from the bank. Sam screamed, yanking his arm free in a spray of blood. He fled upstream, one arm hanging useless. Red Hawk staggered back toward the schoolhouse, clutching his side blood seeping between his fingers. He made it to the porch before his vision grayed. "Sit now." Mabel's voice was pure command. Red Hawk sat heavily, breathing hard. Mabel knelt beside him, peeling back his shirt. She boiled water, cleaned the rib cut with carbolic solution that stung like fire. The wound needed stitches. Mabel threaded Pike's silk suture with steady hands. She stitched carefully, small, even stitches, pulling the flesh closed. Red Hawk breathed shallow, jaw-tight, sweat beading on his forehead. Mabel rested her free hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Don't move," she murmured. "I won't." Their eyes met as she tied off the final suture, close, too close, her face inches from his. Mabel felt his pulse beneath her fingertips, strong and steady despite the pain, and something shifted inside her. Red Hawk felt the careful pressure of her hands, firm and gentle simultaneously, and the strange comfort of being cared for by someone who saw him as human. No words passed between them, but understanding did something deeper than language. Annika watched from the doorway, her small face solemn. She saw the way they looked at each other in that moment of shared vulnerability. She understood that even adults could be hurt, could bleed, could die. On the 8th day, with the hearing 2 days away, the group made their move. Blackthorn had reinforced the dam, stationing 8 guards now instead of 6. Red Hawk, Mabel Clara, Dr. Pike, and two trusted farmers, Jurgen Schmidt and Carl Holloway, planned a coordinated two-pronged strike. They would breach the dam to restore water flow, drawing Blackthorn's forces there, and simultaneously retrieve the full ledger from Blackthorn's office. The storm hit at dusk, rain lashing horizontal wind-bending willow trees, nearly double lightning splitting the sky. Perfect cover for their approach. Red Hawk and Mabel led the dam team with Jurgen and Carl providing backup. They carried two powder kegs wrapped in oilcloth coiled rope and ammunition. Clara took position on the ridge with her Spencer carbine ready to provide covering fire. Annika and Zachary waited in willow shadows, a quarter-mile back, under strict orders to stay hidden. The group crept through mud and reeds rain, soaking through their clothes within minutes. 8 guards patrolled the dam, moving in pairs lanterns, swinging rifles at the ready. Red Hawk pointed with hand signals. Mabel nodded, translating for the others. They split into 2 groups, circling to approach the floodgate from opposite sides. Gunfire erupted without warning. One guard spotted movement in the reeds. Shots tore through the rain muzzle flashes bright orange. Clara returned fire immediately from the ridge, crack, crack, crack. A guard fell clutching his shoulder, screaming. Another dove behind cribbing. Red Hawk and Mabel reached the floodgate boots, sucking in mud. Red Hawk positioned the kegs for a controlled notch blast, enough to release water pressure, and carve a gap not enough to destroy the whole structure and cause catastrophic flooding. Mabel uncoiled the fuse with shaking hands, her fingers numb from cold. Lightning struck the metal sluice chain directly above them. Sparks showered down. Red Hawk threw himself over Mabel, instinctively shielding her body, the heat of electricity searing close. "Light it," he shouted over the thunder. Mabel struck a match once, sputtering and dying. Twice the same. 3 times, cupping her hands desperately, and finally it caught. She touched it to the fuse. It sputtered, smoked, and then caught properly. "Go." Red Hawk grabbed her hand, and they ran, slipping in mud rain, blinding them. While the dam team executed their assault, Dr. Pike and Carl made a parallel dash to Blackthorn's office. They slipped through a side window Pike had scouted earlier. Pike kept watch at the door, while Carl worked on the strongbox with a key and a thin blade. The lock clicked. The strongbox opened. Inside, the full ledger. Leather-bound substantial pages filled with 3 years of entries in Blackthorn's tight script. Names in alphabetical order. Payment amounts. Dates. And at the back, a section labeled SK Contracted Removals. Payment amounts besides specific targets. Completion dates. And there's circled in red ink the Mueller name with a note in Blackthorn's hand. Completed. No complications. Property acquisition to proceed. Carl grabbed the ledger, clutching it to his chest. Behind them, a shotgun cocked. Pocket Paul stood there, trembling, the shotgun heavy in his thin arms. His face was pale, streaked with tears. "Put it down, please. I don't want to shoot you, but I will." Pike turned slowly, hands raised. "Paul, listen. I can't. He'll kill me. He said he'd kill me if I let anyone take that ledger." Red Hawk materialized behind Paul like a shadow, his approach covered by the storm and machinery noise. His hand slammed the shotgun barrel upward, just as Paul's finger tightened on the trigger. The blast tore into the ceiling plaster, raining down. Paul stumbled back, and Red Hawk shoved him against the doorframe, then snatched the shotgun away. "Run!" Red Hawk commanded. Pike and Carl bolted. Red Hawk followed, slamming the door shut and jamming it with a broken chair leg. Outside, Blackthorn's men were mounting horses, shouting orders. At the dam, the fuse burned down. The powder kegs detonated with a controlled whump that shook the ground. A geyser of water and mud erupted skyward. A clean notch blew in the cribbing, exactly as Red Hawk had calculated. Water roared through the gap, cascading back into Copper Creek's natural channel, restoring flow for the first time in months. The sound was like liberation made audible. But the guards rallied. One-eyed Sam, his injured arm roughly bandaged, led a desperate charge toward the floodgate, firing wildly. He saw movement in the willow shadows near the breech lantern light, betraying Annika and Zachary's position. "Get those brats!" Sam yelled, spurring his horse toward them. Zachary stumbled as he tried to run his boot, catching on a root, dropping the lantern. It shattered, flame guttering. Annika scrambled to relight it with shaking hands. Sam bore down on them, knife drawn now, 20 yards away, then 10 closing fast. Red Hawk saw it from across the breach, 50 yards of churning water between them. Time seemed to slow. He sprinted, ignoring the fire in his ribs, from the fresh stitches pulling the cramping in his thigh. His boots pounded through mud lungs, burning. Red Hawk tackled Sam from the side, just as the man reached for Annika, both tumbling toward the edge of the broken dam, rolling through mud. They fought at the very brink, water churning 10 feet below. Sam slashed desperately. Red Hawk caught his wrist, twisted hard, drove his knee into Sam's gut. Sam spat blood, then lunged again and slipped. His boot caught on loose cribbing. He pitched backward arms, windmilling. He hit a wooden piling on the way down, his skull cracking with a sickening thud. His body went limp, rolling into the torrent, and disappeared beneath the churning foam in seconds. Red Hawk's own heel slipped on the wet cribbing, his balance gone, the old wound giving out. He teetered on the edge, arms reaching desperately, finding only air. Mabel saw him falling. Time compressed. She dropped the rope and dove without thought, her hands closing on his belt with a grip like iron. Her nails tore, one ripping completely free at the quick blood mixing with rain. But she held on, boots digging into mud legs, locked, every muscle straining. "Hold on," she screamed. Annika and Zachary piled on immediately, their small hands grabbing his arms, his shirt pulling with all their combined strength. Together, the three of them hauled him back from the edge, inch by agonizing inch. Red Hawk collapsed on solid ground, gasping, mud-covered and shaking. Mabel knelt over him, rain streaming down her face. Her torn hands cradled against her chest, blood dripping, her expression fierce and terrified. "You're not dying on me," she said with utter conviction. "Not today. Not ever." Red Hawk managed a breathless laugh. Wasn't planning to. He reached up with a shaking hand and touched her face briefly. Gunfire erupted again, closer. Blackthorn himself had arrived on horseback, firing wildly, his usual calm shattered. Clara, still on the ridge, shot his hat clean off his head. He cursed violently, wheeled his horse, and fled into the storm, his remaining riders scattering. Then new hoofbeats echoed from the east, many horses organized and purposeful. Red Hawk tensed, reaching for his rifle. But the riders wore badges, tin stars gleaming even in the rain. Sheriff's posse, led by Judge Kingsley himself, a weathered man in his 60s, with a long oilskin coat and a face like carved granite, riding at the head of a dozen deputies. Kingsley dismounted, surveying the scene. The broken dam restoring water flow, bodies in the mud, then the ledger clutched in Carl's hands, Red Hawk bleeding on the ground. Mabel's torn hands, the children huddled together. "Somebody want to tell me what in blazes is going on here?" But before anyone could answer, Pocket Paul stumbled forward from the shadows near the mill, his face pale and stricken, hands raised in surrender, trembling violently. I'll tell you everything. Please, I want immunity. I'll testify to all of it." Kingsley's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Pocket Paul Kendrick, telegraph operator for Blackthorn. I've been passing messages for him for 3 years, warned him when lawmen were coming, intercepted telegrams, falsified records. But I kept copies of everything. Every message, every falsified document. It's all in my office, hidden in the floorboards, 3 years of evidence." His voice broke completely, sobs shaking him. I didn't want to. He threatened my sister Emma. She's in a sanatorium in Denver for consumption, expensive care. He said he'd cut her funding, let her die if I didn't cooperate. But I'm done. I can't do it anymore. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Paul, anxious, nervous pocket. Paul had been Blackthorn's inside man all along. Kingsley nodded slowly. We'll talk, at length. Deputies secure the area. Tend to the wounded. By lantern light in Blackthorn's office, Judge Kingsley reviewed the evidence with methodical precision. The full ledger, the water rights slip, the torn page with removals noted, Dr. Pike's sealed affidavit, Pocket Paul's testimony, Annika's identification of One-Eyed Sam's body, testimonies from farmers, burn patterns analyzed. Kingsley was methodical, asking questions, cross-referencing ledger entries against homestead records, examining the forged lien documents with a magnifying glass. Finally, after more than 2 hours, he closed the ledger with a heavy thud, removed his spectacles, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Reginald Blackthorn is under arrest for fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, illegal seizure of water rights, arson, corruption of public officials, and violations of territorial homestead law. The dam will be reduced to a legal height per territorial statute. The guardianship petition is void declared fraudulent and stricken. The Muller homestead and water rights are restored to the children's inheritance held in trust until they reach majority. Mabel exhaled shakily, tears streaming. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Clara gripped her shoulder. Red Hawk stood silent against the wall. Ribs, aching thigh, throbbing but alive and whole. Pike stepped forward hesitantly. Your Honor, I have a confession. I signed a statement under duress. Kingsley waved him off. I've read your affidavit. All of it, including the coercion. You acted under direct threat to an innocent's life. Your conscience is clear, and the statement signed under duress has no legal weight. But Pike wasn't finished. He swayed on his feet, suddenly unsteady, clutching his side. There's something else? Mabel saw the blood seeping through his coat, dark and spreading rapidly. Solomon, what? He collapsed. They caught him, lowering him carefully. Pike's shirt was soaked red beneath his coat. During the mill fight, a stray shot had caught him in the gut. He'd hidden it with remarkable stoicism, kept working adrenaline, carrying him through. But now, with the crisis past, he was failing rapidly. You fool, Mabel whispered, pressing cloth to the wound, knowing already it was too late. Why didn't you say something? Didn't matter. His voice was fading, breath shallow and rattling. Had to finish, had to make it right. He looked up at her, blood flecking his lips. Keep the clinic keys. Keep helping people. Keep the school warm for the children. Promise me. I promise. Mabel's voice broke. I promise, Solomon. Dr. Solomon Pike died 11 minutes later, surrounded by people he'd helped. They buried him the next morning in the Mud Creek Cemetery under gray skies, under a simple wooden marker, Carl carved, Dr. Solomon Pike. He kept his oath. 1832-1874. Mabel read a short eulogy from a prayer book, her voice steady despite the tears. Red Hawk and Clara stood silent beside her, hats in hand. The children laid wildflowers on the grave prairie roses, their petals bruised but bright. That evening, as the sun set in bands of orange and purple, Red Hawk and Mabel sat side by side on the schoolhouse porch steps. His hand still trembled slightly from blood loss. Mabel noticed, took one of his hands carefully in both of hers, holding his bandaged palm gently. He coughed, ribs protesting, and she shifted closer, her shoulder against his, sharing warmth. He leaned his forehead against hers, no kiss. Nothing rushed, just shared breath. Two people who'd stood together and discovered they fit in ways neither had thought possible. "You didn't let go," he murmured. "Neither did you," she replied softly. They sat like that for a long moment, as darkness gathered the creek, flowing free and full for the first time in months. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song clear and sweet. The guardianship hearing proceeded as scheduled 2 days later in Rock Creek Courthouse. Judge Kingsley presided, the room packed with farmers, townspeople, reporters. Blackthorne, in shackles and flanked by deputies, refused to speak except through his lawyer. His lawyer tried to argue procedural violations, but Kingsley shut him down with case law citations. Pocket Paul provided detailed testimony about bribes, falsified records, warnings sent to Blackthorne. He produced his hidden copies, ledger, duplicates, receipts, coded messages. The courtroom buzzed with scandal. The forged lien documents were systematically dismantled. The debt amounts were pure fabrication, contradicted by county tax records. Kingsley ruled swiftly. The children's inheritance was secure. But the question of custody remained. Mabel stood, her bandaged hands clasped in front of her. "Your Honor, Clara Weiss and I petition for shared guardianship under territorial law, Section 47, which allows for joint custody when in the children's best interests. Clara is a landowner in good standing. I'm an educator with steady employment. Together we can provide a stable, nurturing home." Kingsley considered, then looked to Red Hawk. "And your role in this arrangement?" Red Hawk stepped forward, standing straight, despite the pain. "I offer my home and protection as part of their household under Lakota custom of adoption, and with the formal endorsement of my band, as documented in this letter from our council. The children will know both worlds, settler and Lakota. They will learn both ways of living. They will be safe, honored, and raised with full knowledge of their parents' courage. This I swear before this court and before my ancestors." It was unprecedented. A white widow and schoolteacher, a Lakota warrior, jointly raising orphaned settler children. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some approving, many skeptical, a vocal, few hostile. But the evidence spoke louder than prejudice, the children's clear trust in all three adults. The community support documented in signed statements. The proven cooperation that had brought down Blackthorne's criminal empire. Kingsley nodded slowly. Guardianship granted. Jointly under the provisions of territorial law and with recognition of Lakota customary adoption practices. The children, Annika and Zachary Muller, will remain in Willow Gap under the joint protection and care of Clara Weiss, Mabel Carter, and Red Hawk. This arrangement will be reviewed annually until the children reach majority. This court is adjourned. He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. Annika and Zachary cried with relief, clinging to Mabel. Red Hawk placed a hand on each child's head, a gesture of protection and promise, solemn and binding. Outside afterward, Mabel found a final surprise in Blackthorne's confiscated files. Receipt books showing years of systematic bribes. And behind those detailed forgeries of additional debt papers Blackthorne had prepared in advance, not just for the Muller homestead, but for a dozen other properties strategically located along his planned rail spur route. But there was more. Tucked into the very back, a letter on official territorial stationery, embossed with the territorial seal, signed by a deputy land commissioner named Thaddeus Cornwall. The letter acknowledged receipt of payment for expedited processing of Blackthorne's rail spur application and promised favorable consideration of his land acquisitions. The corruption reached into the territorial government itself. Kingsley reviewed the letter, his face darkening with anger. This goes to the territorial governor, immediately. If Cornwall is still in office when this reaches the capital, he won't be by week's end. What happens to Blackthorne? Mabel asked. He'll stand trial for conspiracy to commit murder. The removals payment Sam's actions witnessed the clear pattern of violence. It's enough for a capital case. If convicted, and he will be convicted, he'll hang. 3 months later, in late October, as cottonwood leaves turned gold, Reginald Blackthorne was hanged in Thunder Mesa at dawn. The execution was witnessed by Judge Kingsley, the territorial marshal, a chaplain, and a crowd of farmers who'd lost homes and kin standing in silent witness. Blackthorne went to the gallows without speaking, his face a mask to the end. One-eyed Sam's body had been buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten. Pocket Paul served 2 years in territorial prison, then moved to California to be near his sister Emma, her sanatorium fees paid from seized Blackthorne assets. Cornwall resigned in disgrace and left the territory. The Copper Creek Dam was reduced to a legal height, 4 feet instead of 12, allowing fair water distribution managed by a newly formed irrigation cooperative. The stamp mill continued operating at half capacity, safer and more sustainable. Life in Willow Gap settled into a new rhythm, slower and steadier, like the creek itself, reliable, life-giving constant. Red Hawk taught Zachary to set deadfall traps for rabbits, using techniques passed down through generations to read wind direction, by observing grass, to track deer, by hoof prints and scat. Mabel watched from the schoolhouse porch one autumn afternoon, unable to hide her smile. As Zachary's young face lit with pride when he successfully set a trap that produced their dinner. Annika helped Mabel measure the creek with a marked measuring pole each week, recording the water level in a ledger for the irrigation cooperative, ensuring the legal height restrictions held. Red Hawk and young Lakota men from his band, 2 cousins named Swift Horse and Walking Bear, and a nephew called Gray Wolf, worked together, chopping excess cribbing, restoring the creek's natural flow patterns. The schoolhouse became a temporary courthouse 2 days each week for neighbors filing water claims and resolving land boundary disputes peacefully. Mabel recorded statements, while Red Hawk checked the door latch twice each session, a protective reflex born from the fire attack, a habit that made Mabel smile warmly despite the serious work. Clara's farm thrived with the restored water. Her fields greened with late-season crops, her cattle fattened, gaining back weight, their coats glossy. Her garden produced enough vegetables to trade throughout the settlement: potatoes, squash beans, carrots. She taught Annika domestic skills, how to gather eggs, milk the cow, churn butter, render lard, and make soap. Henrik returned from helping Dr. Morris Pike's young successor from Philadelphia, idealistic and earnest, organize the new clinic. Pike's medical instruments and reference books were donated to form the core of the clinic's resources. A small brass plaque was mounted outside. Pike Memorial Clinic, founded 1874. One afternoon in late autumn, with winter approaching, Red Hawk and Mabel stood at the edge of Copper Creek, watching water cascade over stones, smoothed by centuries, clear and cold. She stood close, their shoulders nearly touching, a comfortable proximity they no longer questioned. "Think they'll be all right?" Mabel asked softly, nodding toward the children playing near Clara's barn, their laughter carrying on the wind. "They'll be better than all right," Red Hawk said, watching Zachary chase Annika through the grass, both laughing freely, finally allowed to be children. "They're strong, resilient. They survived something that would have broken many adults. Like their parents were, Jacob and his wife had courage most people never find." Mabel looked at him, studying his profile in the golden afternoon light. "And us? What about us?" Red Hawk met her eyes directly, something warm and certain in his dark gaze, no longer hiding what he felt. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time, together like we've been doing, if that's what you want." She smiled, genuine and reaching her eyes. "It's what I want." He returned the smile, rare, brief, transforming his usually serious face into something warmer, younger, vulnerable in a way he allowed few people to see. "Together, then, for as long as we have." "Together," she agreed softly, and the word felt like a promise and a beginning. At sunset that evening, Annika and Zachary stood outside Red Hawk's teepee with their hands small in his larger ones. The hide walls glowed warm with firelight, from inside smoke rising from the peak in a straight column, a beacon of home and safety. Red Hawk held the entrance flap open, gesturing for them to enter. Inside, the same careful order remained that had surprised them so profoundly that first traumatic morning months ago. Bow and quiver hanging straight mended blankets folded precisely the medicine kit in its place. Tins of supplies arranged with military precision. But now additions marked the new reality of their expanded household. Dr. Pike's stethoscope hung from a lodgepole gifted by Mabel in his memory, and polished weekly a reminder of sacrifice and redemption, and the price of courage. A slate propped near the fire ring bore 4 chalk marks in careful script: Annika, Zachary, Red Hawk, and Mabel, the new family unit, unconventional, but real and binding. Annika looked up at Red Hawk, her small face serious beyond her years, needing reassurance one more time. "This is home now, forever and for real." "Yes," he said simply, the single word carrying the weight of an unbreakable oath. "Forever. For real. You're ours now, and we're yours. That's how family works." She and Zachary stepped inside, and Red Hawk let the flap fall closed behind them, sealing them in warmth and safety and belonging. Smoke rose from the smoke hole, curling into the twilight sky, streaked with orange and purple and deepening blue. Meadowlarks settled in the grass for the night, their evening song pure and clear in the cooling air. The creek flowed free and clear and full, its sound a constant reminder of what they'd fought for and won. Life was returning to the valley, one drop at a time, one day at a time, one small act of courage, building on another, until the whole landscape was transformed from a place of oppression into a place of possibility. Mabel stood at the schoolhouse door, watching the teepee in the gathering dusk, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd tell herself later that she was just checking on the children, making sure they were settling in comfortably for the night. But she knew better, knew the truth in her heart. She was watching Red Hawk, this man, who'd kept them all alive through impossible odds, who'd stood between them and death without hesitation, who'd looked at her in the rain and thunder and promised they'd do it together, who'd meant it with every fiber of his being. The stars came out bright and cold and infinite in the clear autumn sky, more stars than she'd ever seen back east, where coal smoke obscured the heavens. The valley breathed around her, alive, and healing scars slowly fading into new growth, damaged earth recovering. And for the first time in months, maybe years maybe, since before she'd lost her family and fled, West Willow Gap felt like a place where the future was not just possible but promised, where broken things could be mended with patience and care, where people from vastly different worlds could build something together that honored them all instead of diminishing anyone. Mabel closed the schoolhouse door, locked it with the key Pike had entrusted to her, and walked slowly toward the teepee, toward the family she'd chosen, and who'd chosen her back without reservation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, there always were in frontier life. The annual review hearing to prepare for winter supplies, to lay in lessons, to plan the eternal work of survival and building. But tonight, right now, in this moment, they were together, they were safe, they were home, and the creek ran free. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.